Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Tomas had spent the night with Eva behind Kat's back, a decision that had begun with a seed of frustration and disappointment he could no longer suppress. The air in Kat's apartment that evening had been tense, almost brittle, like a room in which too many unsaid words floated just above eye level. Tomas had come in with a hopeful glimmer in his eyes, the kind that belonged to a man who thought tonight might bridge the growing gap between him and the woman he loved. But when he hinted at intimacy, Kat's gentle yet firm refusal felt like a door closing in his face. She smiled faintly, as if trying to soften the rejection, but the gesture only deepened the hollow ache in his chest. It was later, back in the solitude of his own space, that Tomas's thoughts began to darken. Eva had seen that look before, the tightening of his jaw, the weight in his shoulders. She read him like an open book, and unlike Kat, she didn't leave him to wrestle with his needs alone. Instead, she had leaned in, her voice smooth and daring, offering a proposition that shimmered with temptation. At first, Tomas laughed it off, trying to keep the conversation light, but Eva's words lingered like smoke. She made him feel seen, desired in a way he hadn't felt in weeks. And that night, in a haze of longing and moral compromise, he crossed the line. He told himself it was a mistake the moment it happened. But even as guilt gnawed at him, he couldn't ignore the undeniable thrill that pulsed through his body. With Eva, there had been no hesitation, no walls. She was bold where Kat was careful, passionate where Kat was reserved. Tomas hated himself for enjoying it, but the memory of her hands, her lips, the way she made him forget everything else, stayed with him. The morning after, he swore to himself and to her that it could never happen again. His voice trembled with a plea, not just for secrecy but for self-control. Eva, lounging against the pillows, merely smiled and assured him she understood. She promised not to breathe a word. Yet the glint in her eyes suggested she knew exactly how hard it would be for him to stay away. Days passed, but the tension in Kat's apartment remained. Kat, perhaps sensing the growing distance, began to reflect on her own choices. She remembered the look on Tomas's face when she had turned him down, and for the first time, she wondered if she had pushed him too far. One evening, she decided to close the space between them. She greeted him at the door wearing a silk nightgown that clung to her in all the right places, her hair loose, her expression soft and inviting. Tomas's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected this, and for a moment, he felt a rush of gratitude. Maybe this was the reconciliation they needed. They fell into each other's arms, and Kat noticed almost immediately that something about him had changed. His movements were more confident, more assured, as though some invisible barrier inside him had been broken. She gasped at his touch, murmuring praise between breaths. "You're incredible," she whispered, not realizing each compliment twisted the knife of guilt deeper into Tomas's heart. Because even as he kissed her, even as he whispered her name, flashes of Eva's body intruded on his mind. The way Eva moved, the way she looked at him with unfiltered hunger, it was all there, beneath the surface of his affection for Kat. The temptation became impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Tomas found himself answering a message from Eva without thinking. She suggested meeting at a hotel, far from prying eyes. He hesitated, typing and deleting his responses, but in the end, curiosity and desire won. They met in the dimly lit room, the curtains drawn, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence between stolen kisses. It was reckless, intoxicating. Hours melted away until they both knew they had gone too far to pretend it was a one-time mistake. This dangerous pattern continued, the days between their meetings feeling like an eternity. Each encounter was more urgent, more intense than the last, as though they were both aware that the bubble they'd created could burst at any moment. Tomas convinced himself he could juggle both worlds, the comfort and stability of Kat, and the raw, unfiltered passion of Eva. But guilt lingered, a shadow that grew darker with every lie he told. Kat, meanwhile, began to notice the subtle shifts in Tomas's behavior. He was distracted, sometimes distant, and his excuses for late nights or sudden disappearances were starting to sound rehearsed. She told herself not to jump to conclusions, but doubt had already taken root. One afternoon, she found herself near a downtown hotel for an unrelated errand when she saw them. Eva and Tomas, stepping out of a side entrance, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that spoke volumes. They didn't see her at first. The world seemed to slow down as Kat's mind connected the dots. The sight was enough to confirm what her heart had feared. Her breath caught in her throat, her stomach twisting with betrayal. She didn't confront them immediately. Instead, she watched as they walked away, her thoughts a storm of anger, hurt, and disbelief. Every shared moment with Tomas now felt like a lie, every word of affection tainted by the image of him with Eva. It was as if the ground beneath her had shifted, leaving her on unstable footing. That night, Kat replayed everything in her mind: the nights she had pushed Tomas away, the sudden change in his touch, the late-night texts he had guarded so closely. She wondered if she had driven him into Eva's arms, or if he had been looking for an excuse to leave all along. The questions were relentless, and the answers, if they existed, were ones she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Meanwhile, Tomas lay awake in his own bed, unaware that the facade was already crumbling. He thought about Kat's warmth, Eva's fire, and the impossibility of choosing between them without losing everything. In the quiet darkness, he knew the truth: he was already losing it all, piece by piece, with every secret he tried to keep. Kat's mind spun in disbelief as she stood frozen in the hotel corridor, her eyes locked on the sight of Tomas and Eva emerging from the room together. Their faces betrayed 1,000 emotions: guilt, surprise, and something deeper, something Kat wasn't sure she was ready to name. She had suspected for days, noticing the subtle shifts in Tomas's demeanor, the absent stares, the quick glances at his phone, the faint scent of a perfume she didn't own. But to see it confirmed with her own eyes was something else entirely. Tomas opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Eva, on the other hand, lifted her chin defiantly. It was as though she was daring Kat to say something, to react, to lash out. The air between the three of them was charged, thick with unspoken accusations. Finally, Kat turned on her heel without a word and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed to breathe, to think, to decide whether to confront Tomas later or let silence speak for her. Tomas knew he couldn't let this fester. That night, he came home to find Kat sitting in the living room, the lamp casting long shadows across her face. The tension was suffocating. He started with an apology, a clumsy attempt to bridge the gap that had widened between them. But Kat's eyes told him she wasn't ready to forgive. She demanded the truth, not just about what happened in that hotel room, but about when it began, how many times, and why. Tomas faltered, torn between protecting himself and revealing the full extent of his betrayal. Meanwhile, Eva carried herself as though nothing had happened, at least on the surface. But in the privacy of her own mind, she replayed every stolen moment with Tomas, weighing the pleasure against the cost. She knew she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and part of her wondered if that was the point. Eva had always been drawn to dangerous games, and this one had the highest stakes yet. Over the next few days, the scandal began to ripple outward. Small-town gossip had a way of traveling fast, and whispers about Tomas and Eva found their way into conversations at the cafe, the grocery store, and even Kat's workplace. Kat tried to ignore them, but each overheard fragment felt like a knife twist. Eva seemed oddly unfazed by the murmurs, but Tomas felt the weight of judgment wherever he went. As the strain grew, Kat found herself questioning more than just her relationship with Tomas. She wondered about her own choices, about how she had allowed distance to grow between them, and whether she had pushed him into Eva's arms. Yet, even as she wrestled with self-blame, a voice in her head reminded her that betrayal was a choice Tomas had made, and Eva had helped him make it. One evening, Kat made a decision. She invited Tomas to sit down with her, not for another round of accusations, but for a conversation about what came next. She was calm, almost unnervingly so. She laid out her boundaries. If Tomas wanted to repair their relationship, It would require complete transparency, counseling, and time apart from Eva permanently. Tomas hesitated. The truth was, he wasn't sure he could stay away from Eva. There was something magnetic about her, something intoxicating, even as he knew it was destructive. Eva, sensing Tomas's inner turmoil, reached out to him in secret. She painted their connection as something rare, something worth risking everything for. She reminded him of the passion they shared, contrasting it with the tension and coldness in his relationship with Kat. Her words were tempting, but they also filled Tomas with a gnawing sense of dread. He stood at a crossroads, aware that any choice he made would leave someone broken. The days ahead would bring confrontations neither Kat, Tomas, nor Eva could fully prepare for. Each of them had underestimated the depth of the fallout, and the lines between desire, loyalty, and revenge were about to blur beyond recognition. Kat didn't give him time to rehearse an answer. When Tomas opened his mouth, she cut him off, her voice as calm as ice over deep water. "Spare me the lies. I already know more than you think." She stood then, leaving the photo on the table like a loaded weapon between them. "You can tell me here, or you can tell me when I've packed your things and left them outside." The room seemed smaller, the air denser. Tomas's first instinct was to defend himself, but every excuse that formed in his mind collapsed under the weight of the truth. His pulse hammered in his ears, and he realized there was no way out of this without inflicting damage. The question was who would bear the brunt, Kat, Eva, or himself. "I made a mistake," he said finally, his voice low. "It wasn't supposed to happen, and it didn't mean." "It didn't mean anything?" Kat's laugh was short and humorless. "You don't go to the same hotel over and over for something that doesn't mean anything." She pushed past him, collecting her phone. "You had a choice every single time, and you chose her." For a moment, Tomas saw the full picture: Kat's pain, Eva's hold over him, and the hollowness of his justifications. He wanted to promise change, to beg for another chance, but the look in Kat's eyes told him the window for that had already closed. Kat walked to the door and opened it wide. "Leave." Tomas hesitated. He half expected her to soften, to give him one last reprieve. When she didn't, he stepped out into the hallway, the click of the door locking behind him final in a way that made his chest tighten. Across town, Eva's phone lit up with a message from Tomas: "We need to talk." She read it twice before setting it down, unease creeping in. She thought their arrangement had been safe hidden enough to protect them both. But the blunt tone of the message told her otherwise. They met later that night in the same hotel they'd used before, but the energy was different. No playful touches, no drawn-out greetings. Tomas stood by the window, looking out at the city as if it might give him answers. "She knows," he said without turning around. Eva's body tensed. "How much?" "Enough. She had pictures. She kicked me out." His voice cracked on the last words, a sound that surprised even him. Eva crossed her arms, processing. "So what now?" The question lingered, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Tomas turned to face her, his expression more raw than she'd ever seen. "I don't know. But whatever this weighs, it's over." For the first time, Eva's confident veneer faltered. She'd known, deep down, that this day might come, but she hadn't expected the sudden void it left. "You think ending this will fix anything?" she asked quietly. "No," Tomas admitted. "But it's the only thing I can do." They parted without touching. Outside, the night felt colder than it had in months, the air slicing through his shirt as he walked away. Kat, meanwhile, spent the evening in her apartment in deliberate silence. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she began moving through the rooms, gathering traces of him: the jacket on the back of a chair, the toothbrush by the sink, the half-empty bottle of cologne on the dresser. Each object went into a cardboard box, sealed with a strip of tape that sounded like finality. When the box was done, she set it by the door and stood over it, her arms folded. The apartment felt different, lighter, somehow, but also strangely empty. She knew there would be nights when the loneliness would creep in, when she'd question whether she'd been too harsh. But she also knew trust, once broken like this, could not be mended into what it had been. Days turned into a week. Tomas didn't come back. Eva didn't call. Kat returned to her routines, each one an act of reclaiming space for herself. She deleted Tomas's number, blocked Eva's on social media, and let the silence between them stretch wide. One afternoon, she passed the hotel where she'd seen them together. For a brief second, her pace slowed. But instead of the sharp pain she expected, there was only a muted echo. She kept walking, the memory no longer an open wound but a scar beginning to fade. Tomas found a small apartment on the other side of the city. The nights were the hardest, quiet and empty, with too much room for thoughts to circle back. He thought about Kat more than he wanted to, about Eva less than he expected. The thrill Eva had given him seemed hollow now, stripped of the secrecy that had once made it feel powerful. Eva, on her part, threw herself into her own life with characteristic determination. She told herself she was fine, that she'd simply move on to the next adventure. But in rare unguarded moments, she found herself remembering the way Tomas had looked at her in the beginning, before the guilt, before the unraveling. In the end, none of them got what they wanted. Kat didn't get closure from Tomas. Tomas didn't get forgiveness from Kat. Eva didn't get to keep what she thought she'd stolen. What they were left with was the truth, stripped bare and unflinching. Some choices can't be undone, and some doors, once closed, should stay that way. On a gray morning weeks later, Kat opened her window and let in the cool air. Somewhere below, the city went on, indifferent to the small dramas that had played out in its streets and hotels. She breathed in deeply, feeling, for the first time in months, that she could start again. And in another part of the city, Tomas walked past a coffee shop they had once visited together, the bell over the door ringing as someone else went in. He kept walking, not because he didn't remember, but because he finally understood there was no way back through the gates he had chosen to cross.